Welcome to summer. No, it's not summer SOMOS Fun Club. I did it again. Welcome to At Home SOMOS Fun Club. I am here with Elicia Cardenas, and today we are talking about classroom libraries. Hello, Elicia.
Hi, I'm not staying at home. I'm actually in my classroom cleaning and packing and honestly trying to manage all of the many emotions this brings. And just enjoying being in this space for the last few days that I have it. So we're not live today.
No, we are not. So early this morning, I guess, we had planned, we had announced that we were going to be doing this Fun Club episode, and got a lot of people that were really excited about it because classroom libraries matter and reading matters. But then this morning, we woke up and on social media, we saw some of the initiatives that are happening. Blackout Tuesday, which is kind of an offshoot of a really important initiative started by two Black women called The Show Must Be Paused. And in reading about their initiative and the intent behind it it was for the music industry to basically stay off social media today, to be pausing what they're doing to make space for Black voices to be heard in this really critical moment in our nation's history. We decided that we wanted to contribute to that. We also wanted to pause our show. So we decided to take it off the air. We are not going live. But Elicia does have to pack up her classroom. And so we want to get that look at her library. So we are going to be airing this afterward so that you can still benefit from it. And the fact is that racism is a part of our lives. Equity work needs to be a part of our lives. Anti-racism work needs to be a part of our lives. And so it is important to look for opportunities to call special attention to it, like we're doing today with this, by joining this initiative, but also to figure out, how does my life go on and how does our work go on with anti-racism and equity work being woven into it. And we're excited to be talking with you about that as you're watching this episode, as we're looking at class libraries.
And this isn't the only conversation we're going to be having. Personally, this is something that I've been working on since I became an educator and working towards and working around. And it's a huge motivator for me to come to the Comprehensible Classroom and work with teachers around these issues. So that's a big part of why I'm here and in this position and leading this beautiful library. I have had the great fortune to be working with our school's Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the last 6 years, which has been a really interesting experience, and I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to bring some of that learning to us. That being said, let's talk about classroom libraries, shall we?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right.
So Elicia, can you tell us, well, actually, I'll wait for our guiding slide.
I made a guide this time, guys.
And it's so cute.
I really, really didn't want to clean my classroom anymore. So I needed to take a little break because I've made about 10 square feet clean. So
that's progress.
First of all, what is the purpose of a classroom library? I'm going to go ahead and pull out so you guys can see my classroom library. And while I'm sort of panning, Martina, can you tell us what the purpose of the classroom library is?
Yeah. So first of all, you might have read, as I was introducing this topic, I had classroom libraries in all of my English language arts classes growing up, but I never had a classroom library in my Spanish classes. And so this was a totally new concept to me. And a classroom library in a languages class the purpose is for students to be able to have access to books that they can read and understand with confidence in order to promote language acquisition. We know that students, oh gosh, I'm going to botch this quote, Elicia, you might have to help, that reading is the best chance it's on your
I have
library,
it right here.
I was like, I know it's on your
right
library. People acquiring a second language have the best chance for success through reading. And we want to give our students the best chance for success in language acquisition. And so we need to have books, we need to have things for them to read. And so that is the beginning of the purpose of a classroom library.
I want to go back to something that you said, which I think is so important. Books that students can read and understand with confidence. Why is it so important that they can understand it? And why is it so important that they are confident when reading? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So actually, when I first kind of moved away from the textbook, when I first heard about classroom libraries, I, like many other teachers, found I just went on eBay and I got lots, like not many, but like lots, bunches of. I'm just using synonyms. Like, you know how on eBay and you get like a group of books. I got lots of books. So I would buy a lot of 200 children's books in Spanish for like $30. And
oh my God, I totally did that too, only at the local library. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that was what we did, because there weren't books like the ones that you that we see behind you that we're going to look at in a little bit. There weren't so many of them available. But children's literature is filled, even really simple children's literature is filled with, is usually more focused on decoding, and it's focused on words that kids are familiar with, which are not necessarily the same words that a language learner is going to be familiar with. And in order for us to acquire a language, when we're receiving messages, when we're receiving input, everything comes into our head. So if Elicia is speaking in Spanish, ba 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 ba, I'm hearing all of her messages and my brain is trying to process it. What's happening when my brain is trying to process those messages is it's trying to link the forms contained within the messages that she's giving me to meaning. And if my brain can link them to meaning, if my brain can understand them, then it receives that input as intake and it gets applied to my mental representation of language, which is basically my version of Spanish that lives in my head. And then I can draw on that from output. If my brain can't link the forms that in the language that she's giving to me as input to meaning, that language is dumped. It's worthless to my brain. It doesn't hang around. It just goes away. So
it's
if
like
you're
Charlie Brown's teacher, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, if you're reading a book and you're not and your brain is not able to link the words on the page and the forms contained within the words to meaning, then it's just in one ear and out the other. It isn't being applied to the mental representation of language. It's not helping you spur you on toward language acquisition.
So yes, I want to add, so I totally bought all the kids' books and then I realized that they were really hard. Like they were colorful and they were familiar and like, yeah, the version of Hop on Pop in Spanish, it's a great book. And I'm trained as a reading instructor and a literacy coach. My original credential is in elementary with a focus on reading and bilingual reading. So of course, children's books are like my bread and butter. And I've always had a library in every classroom, but I didn't understand that kids' books are actually written at an intermediate, mid, or higher level unless they're board books for babies. And the board books for babies will not engage an eighth grader for more than 1 minute, I guarantee. I have learned from experience. So books that are, like kids' books that are comprehensible for my novice learners, and I teach up to Spanish 2 honors, are not are boring for them. So I do have a handful that are super high interest and repetitive, and almost no kid ever reads them. Like they do it once and then they're like, this is dumb. I want something better. And so that's where we have all of the like novels behind me as well. However, you can read without having a single novel. You can have a classroom without having a single novel and without spending any money other than to print things up. And I want to say that because when I started my little tiny library, my free choice or free voluntary reading library, I didn't have all these novels. I had 0 novels. All I did was type up the stories that we made in class that we co-created, and I saved them from year to year. And I asked other people to share their stories. And I went on Teachers Pay Teachers and I looked for free, easy stories. And then usually they weren't that easy. So I would download them and edit them because, or add language to scaffold them. So this is actually one of the very first stories that I ever asked, and I can tell because it's really long and has lots of language and is kind of incomprehensible. I think this is from my first year, but all this is a piece of paper with a page protector, and I bought page protectors at the dollar store so that they'll last. So that's just, if you're feeling like you don't have the money, this has taken me 6 years, most of it with my own money to build up, and like, you don't have to do that, okay?
And yes, like students love seeing a neat cover, you know, like that will draw them in. But if they have a simple page in front of them with a story that they can understand, that's funny, or that is just a topic that they're interested in, it is just as engaging. And so don't hate on the printables. If that's where you're at, don't feel like you don't have enough to be reading with your students.
And you can also, like, if you want to put more effort and time than just printing it up, you can have the kids illustrate their own. And awesome. It's funny because these are not popular. I have to direct kids to them because they're not as cool until her little sister sees it.
Yeah.
That's so cool, right?
Yeah.
Or they're like, hey, we did a story just like this. Or, you know.
It's those connections.
Connections
are so, you know, when we talk about the mindset shift of connection over curriculum, that applies in so many different ways. But, you know, seeing stories that are written by people they know, seeing stories that are written about people they know, seeing stories that have the same similar plots to stories that they have also created. All of those things will draw a student in and cause them to want to keep reading it.
And even if it's just for 3 minutes, and we'll talk about how long kids read here in a minute. The other thing I want to talk about are, there's a lot of, if you're active on the social media channels, such as the IFLT page or the SOMOS page, people post stories there. People post readings all the time. I save them, I print them, I check them to make sure they're going to work for my school context. That's important, guys, because what works for me may not work for you, and that's okay. And then I display them so kids have things to read. There are authors like Martina, like Nellie Hughes, like Christy Placido, and Carrie Toth, who all create these amazing readings that you can purchase on different cultural topics. And if I find one that really speaks to me, I'll go ahead and purchase that and display it. Or if I know that there's one kid who's obsessed with that thing, and I find the thing, for one kid, it was about skiing. And I found a really cool reading about skiing that I didn't have to write. It was totally worth the like $1.50, you know? That's how I have built up my short, comprehensible readings that are even easier than novels, because you kind of have to have some language before you can read a novel.
And stamina, like it's you know, it's both of those things. It's and that's something that Myra Canyon has really talked to me about, is that the concept of stamina, that even if a student has the language, could understand with reasonable ease all the words on the page, you don't go from only reading a sentence to all of a sudden being able to read a novel. You know, you start with sentences, and then you build up to paragraph length text, and then you build up to several pages and to a chapter, and then eventually, you know, you have the stamina it takes, because it's hard work to process language. Even when it's language that you can understand with confidence, it still is work to be reading in another language. And so students need that stamina. So I'm glad that you brought that up, that we need to have those short readings in our library.
Absolutely. And I think that takes us to, so the purpose of the classroom library is to provide lots and lots of reading, because we know that that's going to help learners acquire. It's going to help teach the grammar that I don't necessarily teach. It's going to help teach all of the pieces and give students vocabulary. And I can tell you this from experience, that like I don't often use, and yet it shows up because they're seeing it in context and it makes sense.
Absolutely. And before you go on, I do want to I do want to plug Garbanzo, because as we're looking at the possibility, the very real possibility, the miserable possibility of remote teaching in this coming year. And I know some teachers they are concerned, first of all, about just not being in their classrooms for their students to be able to using the books, but also administrators talking about like not sharing books between students. Garbanzo is our online interactive library of stories. And so it doesn't have novel length texts, but any topic that you can think of is in Garbanzo. So that is a way for you to give your students access to stories, even if you're not going to be physically in your classroom in the coming year.
Absolutely. And I just received some survey results from my students. They really, really liked Garbanzo. It was a very consistent piece. They liked how it was organized, that once they figured out, like once they all remembered their login, that was challenging for seventh graders. Yeah. Once they did that, they loved it. So that was really nice.
Thank you for saying that. It has been, thank you.
Okay, so how do I physically build a library?
Well, you have a little bit of a special one.
I do, and I inherited this. Before I had this, I just had bookshelves. Mm-hmm. But I really look at library organization the same way I looked at it as an elementary teacher, which means I want it to be inviting. I want it to be easy for students and myself to find what they need and put it back, because that's a big deal. And then I want it to be a place that feels welcoming. So inviting, welcoming, like I want them to be able to use it. Yeah. So for me, in my old classroom, before I had this magical space, it just meant bookshelves and a rug. And instead of like bare, when I could, I tried to like have pretty lights like this, and like a pretty cover, which can you see, like bright cloth, and I had fairy lights up and that sort of thing, just to kind of differentiate it. Yeah. Because that makes a difference. And if you have a child in an elementary classroom and you can get in, imagining we're, not socially distanced, go look at an elementary teacher's library space, because they all have them. And look at what they've done. Sometimes it can be so simple. A really common thing is to just use bins. So this is an example of, this is a dollar store bin. Okay. And these are actually the bins that I used in my elementary classroom. And then I loosely organized. These are a lot of the books that I bought that are children's books. They're really too hard for my kids. Yeah. So they actually live in the bottom shelf. And nobody ever looks at them.
Well, I guess this is going to be a different question. So I'll save it. Well, I was just in Andrea Schweitzer's class in her classroom in Dallas. Yes. And in her room, she just had a counter at the back of her space. And then behind the counter was a whiteboard with a whiteboard tray. And she just had books on the counter, She had little book covers. It looks like you might have those too.
Mm-hmm.
She had printed copies of the book covers and then taped them down onto the counter to designate, like, this is the spot for this book. And she had those all along the counter. So hers was, you know, even more simple
Yep.
than what we see there, just like stacks of books on a counter. And then there were some more that were arranged on the tray of her whiteboard.
And yet it was still super inviting, easy to see what was there, unleveled, which we'll talk about that also. Like, it was just a nice place. And it was obvious that, like, reading is important in this classroom, which is key, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Sending that message is super powerful.
Last week, I showed you guys my bulletin board where I have a picture of every kid reading, and then a list of all the books that they've read and some quotes. And, like, that's just one way that I really try to send the message. Like, in this classroom, reading is king or queen.
Well, but it's interesting too, because, you know, I think that with all of the push for standardized testing and, you know, hitting these like benchmarks, reading is really important, but it's important in a different way than it actually is in real life. Like in schools, like reading is king, and that, like, oh, you've got to be hitting your reading scores, but reading isn't supposed to be scary. Like, reading is supposed to be inviting. It's supposed to be pleasant. It's, you know, it's supposed to be comforting. And so I think sending that message that, like, yeah, reading is king or queen here. And, like, not in the scary way.
It's reading for pleasure. And reading reading with choice, not like we all have to read the same book. It's reading because this is what we're doing, and there's lots of things to pick from. And if there's nothing that really speaks to you, student, I will find something that does. And we'll have a lot of conversations about it. And I have to tell you, my favorite words in my classroom are, in English, "Senora, can you recommend a book, please?" And I trained my kids that, like, that is the best thing you could possibly say to me at any given day. And so suddenly I'm finding more about them. We're having these relationship building conversations, and they're reading things that they like. Like, everybody wins. Yeah. So cool.
Totally. We got off our thing. I guess some teachers use rain gutter shelves. If you just go into any big Facebook group, if you go into the IFLT and TPRSCI teaching Facebook group, I know, and search for classroom libraries, you'll see lots of different ideas. I believe Spanish Mama Elizabeth Alvarado has compiled a blog post with photos of all different kinds of classroom libraries on her blog. So you could search for classroom libraries there to see a bunch of ideas. But there's really, I don't know, there's no wrong way to build it. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to, what would you say are the key things that
inviting
and see the
functional.
Yeah.
So, like, kids know how to find things and where to put them back. That's really important. And then comprehensible. Like, they need to be able to understand the books. If the books aren't at their level, then it's not going to serve its purpose.
Easy peasy. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy.
It is kind of easier said than done, but you know, it is totally doable. So, what books should I put in? This is a really important question.
All right. Well, what we started talking about this a little bit. So we're looking for books that your students can understand, which is different than just buying any Spanish language material, than looking for People magazine in Espanol or in Francais or whatever language you're teaching. It's different than, on your next trip to a country that speaks your target language, about just going to a bookstore and buying up some books that have cool covers. You're looking specifically for texts, so books and printable texts that your students can understand. And that's the first layer.
That's the first layer. And so if you teach a less commonly taught language, for instance, we just welcomed a Dutch teacher and an Arabic teacher into our SOMOS collaboration group. So don't lose heart, friends. the self-created texts that you make like these are just as good. And at some point, there will be more books in your target language. I promise they are being written, and you can even write them yourselves, which is really powerful. And we can link to some resources on to help you if that's something you're interested in as well. So where do we get these books? Well, there are independent authors who publish. There are small publishing houses. Now, small means they might have 1 employee, they might have 2 employees, and they might have 5 employees. So small publishing houses. Yeah, should we go ahead and we will put some links, but most of the books I have are published by Fluency Matters, Myra Canyon, TPRS Books, and Senor Woolley, and a variety of independent authors.
Yeah, and we have a list that I try to keep updated with all of the books that you could put in your library that we think that are, you know, written with in the intent for readers to understand them. So including independent authors on that list. And I do have a hard time, if anybody feels particularly compelled to help me keep up with that list, that would be an amazing project to tackle with me, because they're just being published at an exceptional rate, which is so exciting. And
so the books range from very, very, very sheltered vocabulary, which means there's very few words, very few new words, all the way up to still written as comprehensible text, but something that I would use more in a level 4 class. And so the second mistake that I made in my library was I bought too many advanced books because they were the ones I wanted to read. So I actually have a rather significant collection of level 3 to 5 books. And it took me a few years to get enough of the very easiest books. And if I had to go back in time, if I could, or if I had to suggest to anybody starting out with a new library, get as many of the easiest books as you can, because you can never have too many.
I'm really glad you said that, because I think that as language teachers, when we're reading books in a language that we speak, the ones that are more advanced are going to have the more compelling stories for us, because they're written with more complex language. The plot development can be much more complicated because it's more advanced language. And so we're like, you're going to gravitate toward those books. You're going to enjoy them more. And you're going to think, oh, my students would love this. Well, they would love it if they could understand it, but they probably can't. So, looking at those really simple books, part of what I've learned as I'm learning French is that even if the plot isn't that engaging to me, I'm just so excited that I'm reading a book in French that that motivates me and engages me and keep reading. I want to keep going on to the next sentence. What am I going to understand next? It's really exciting. So
I think that's so important to not underestimate the simple power of just reading.
Yeah.
A book. It's so cool. And I do tell my kids, hey, this isn't great literature. Some books are more compelling than others. Some books are hilarious. Some books are all right, I read it. And that's okay. Everybody, the books that I like are probably very different than the books that you like, Martina, in English that we read for fun. My husband and I almost never agree on books, which creates some really exciting dinner table conversations.
Yeah.
So it's okay. I do try to have as much variety as I can, but not variety in levels. I do have a variety in levels because, like all of us, I have a Spanish 2 honors kid who's jumping into Spanish 4, and I have a kid who didn't really ever make it through Spanish 1A, and I need to find something for all of them.
Yeah.
Right? But the easier the better, because they need to be able to understand it. So
and a good guideline when you're looking at, how easy is this book? Every publisher most publishers will make recommendations. They'll say, oh, this is a level 2-3 book or a 1-2 book. And honestly, like that's really subjective, right? Subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, subjective. A better thing to look at is word count, but even word count is not consistent in how they're counted across, like from one publisher to another. But if you look at word count, unique word count compared to total word count. So if a book only has 50 words total in it and there's 50 unique words, well, that's not an easy book to read because not any of those words are repeated. But if you see a book that has 3,000 words in it with only 50 unique words, that means that the vocabulary is really sheltered. And some publishers count cognates in their unique word count, some don't. So there's always going to be some level of variation about, how difficult is it really. But looking at that word count is just, it's a good starting place for you to know what books to buy, and then you can just read them on your own.
And I would add that first of all, I do try to read all of them. I fail. Like, I haven't read everything in my library because there's so many new ones, and because the most popular ones, I don't want to take out of the kids' hands.
Yeah.
Because they start telling each other, oh, this one's good, you should read this one. But I also ask the kids to tell me, was it easy, medium, or hard? And just write it. And I'll show you what that sort of very almost no accountability looks like. Mm-hmm. But that way I start to get a sense, like, student who is a really low reader thinks this book is really easy. Well, that's going to be a really easy book,
yeah.
Right? So I can start getting a sense if I don't have a chance to read it myself, or just to like calibrate myself. The other thing is I very intentionally teach the kids. I spend a whole day teaching them about what it means to be comprehensive, what it means to read and understand. And I do use a 5-finger rule, which is if you have to look up more than 5 words, it's not a great fit for you. And
5 words on a page.
5 words on a page, which I prefer 3 words on a page or 2. Like, that's what I tell them to go for. I'm never going to tell a kid that they can't read a book. But what I do say are things like, I just don't know if you're going to get as much value out of our precious reading time. We only have this many minutes a week, and I want you to get the most out of it as you can. If you want to read it, absolutely. If you want to start it and you don't want to finish it, that's okay. And I'll help you find something else.
Yeah. I love that, like reaffirming that permission.
Oh, yes. You never have to finish a book in my class. You can put it back. That's so important. So I'm gonna move us on because we could just keep talking about this
before we say like what books to put in, I also want to talk about so we've talked about the comprehension piece, but then in terms of content, this is something that a conversation that we had in preparing for this. How do you decide if a book is a good fit in terms of content for your library, and if it's the kind of a story that you want your students to have access to?
So the same way a librarian does. So there's a few different things. One of them is that I look at my library as a living collection. And just like a librarian at your local public library or your school library does, I go through and I pull and I cull and I add. So every year the books are going to be different to some degree. If I find a book that I don't think serves a purpose anymore, for whatever reason, I'm going to pull it. There are some books that some people feel are very problematic, with either stereotypes, kind of a white savior coming in and like looking at a culture through a very specific cultural lens, that some people find to be very problematic, and I deeply respect that. Some of those books remain in my library, some of them don't. It depends on the book, it depends on the history, it depends on the level, but also I think about something that my great colleague and school librarian, who I've been working on our diversity committee with for years, she's considered an expert in these matters, and we sat down and we went through my library with a cultural lens. And she explained this to me in a way that I really loved. She said, do you remember Laura Ingalls Wilder books, the Little House on the Prairie books, which if you're a woman of a certain age, you probably read them. Wow. Do you guys remember that Pa wears blackface?
I don't remember that.
Oh yeah, I didn't either actually until she pointed it out. Really problematic. And yet those are canonical American literature written by a woman about women's lives, right? So there is a value and there's a huge problem. So the way she looks at it as a librarian is, I have them. If somebody wants to read them, I'm not going to tell them not to, but I am going to have a conversation about it. And I'm not going to recommend them. There's so many better books, but I have it.
Yeah.
Because it might be the book that the kid needs. It might be the book that the parent wants the kid to read. So to me, those two key ideas, I'm not going to get rid of it, but I'm not going to recommend it. And I'm going to have a conversation about it. It's really important.
I think that is really practical, and like, I think that because I didn't really start thinking about this, to be honest, until the last year, to be really looking critically at the books. I mean, I don't have a classroom library now, but I do have this list of books that you can put in your library and that are written with attention to comprehension. And thinking like, oh my gosh, do I need to? Is it damaging for me to keep these books on this list? But realizing that acknowledging it, like knowing what's in your books, knowing how to read with that cultural lens, considering like what messages are being sent overtly and covertly in a text, and then knowing like what can I talk to my students about? Like this is they are going to be confronting these ideas in their own lives, and so if they choose this book, this is an opportunity for me to model that conversation with them.
Absolutely. And it does mean you need to know your students. You need to know what they're reading. You need to know their books. But that to me is all part of being a classroom teacher. And I also, I respect people who are like, those books have no place in my library. I absolutely respect that. And I encourage you to look at your books with a critical lens. Do you have representations of your students, and do you have representations of people that your students would not necessarily encounter? So the idea of windows and mirrors is a really powerful one, and I think it's important to have all kinds of books. For instance, in my community, this is a really important book. You can see that it has a gay theme. It's about a love triangle. About a gay teenage love triangle. And if that doesn't fly in your community, that's okay. It is absolutely an expectation in my community that we have books that represent all kids. Another book that I just love, Vector by Carrie Toth, is written from the perspective of an Afro-Latino between different time frames and the experience of building the Panama Canal. I've had so many kids connect with this. I've had so many kids connect with Felipe Alou. I've had so many kids connect with Santana. And yet I've had so many of my soccer playing girls connect with La Llorona, which is a book about soccer.
And love.
And love, yes. So, and I've also had so many kids connect with the book about the capybara. Because that's so important, because it's so funny. And so I want something for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for saying all of that, Elicia. And I think that paired with that is, looking at everything that's happening in our country right now. And as more and more teachers are learning that there is such a thing as anti-racism, and deciding like, I want that for me. Like, I want to be an anti-racist educator. And we're looking at lists of action steps that you can take, and looking at, looking critically at our own lives, and, who are the people in our lives, and who is represented in the people that are playing a role in our own lives. Taking that and looking at our classroom libraries and saying, can my students see themselves here? And can my students see people in these libraries that they aren't seeing in their lives? Like, if their lives are very white, like my life, I live in rural Vermont, like, those, I keep thinking, whenever I see a post that is, anti-police and saying like, we don't need a police department, like there are communities that are functioning almost entirely without police. Like, my town literally doesn't have a police department. Like, I live in very rural white Vermont. And so how do I bring representation of other races, of other cultures into my kids' lives? And reading is such a natural, easy way, powerful way to do that. So if authors, if you are Black, Indigenous, a person of color, write stories with characters that look like you. And those are so needed. You can self-publish, you can work with a publisher, but we need to hear your stories. We don't want to hear, I think that we've done teachers in comprehension-based teaching have been functioning with stories that are primarily written by white authors for a long time. And I'm so thankful for the representation that they have had in their writing. And it's really exciting that more and more teachers of color are feeling empowered enough to tell their own stories. And I'm excited that in the work of amplification that we are able to do in that.
Absolutely. So, that being said, what's next? So we've talked about how to build the library, what books should I put in, where I get them, we'll put links up. How do I organize it? Okay, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but there's kind of there's a few schools of thought. One, leveled. So these are the beginner books, these are the intermediate books, these are the hard books. Number two, by author or subject. That's what you're going to find most sort of forward-thinking elementary classrooms do, is that they have all the books on sports in one bin, and they have all the books by favorite author Judy Blume in one bin. And then there might be some kind of mix mash of that, where they're maybe color coded by level, but organized in groups. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep, totally.
And I would say that's probably how I have ended up organizing mine. Is I have it loosely organized by easiest to hardest over this way, but it's pretty loose. And so I really rely on the recommendation and the interaction with the kids. Like, what did you just read? Was it easy or hard? Do you want to read something about like that, easier or harder? And knowing my library. So those are really important questions. What did you just finish reading? And then I can go, oh, did you like that author? Do you want to read something else about that author? Did you know that's a series? And so a big change I made this year was grouping authors together. And so this is, these are from the dollar section at Target. They're cardboard and they're pieces of crap. I had to tape them all together, which is going to be really fun when I break them down. But I have everything by author Karen Rowan here. So if somebody's like, I really liked that Isabella book, I'm like, oh, there's another one. Here it is.
Perfect.
Or why don't you go find the other books by that same author? Craig Klein de Semple. Do you know how to say it?
Actually,
I don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
His books
Okay.
are super, super, super popular.
Yes.
So I have them grouped together. And then I had extra space, so I added another book that has a lot of visual. So I have all the Brandon Brown books in one group. Over here, I have all the books by Alicia Quintero. Actually, there's some more up here.
She has a lot now.
She does. I have some kind of like mystery action books together.
Okay.
I have, let's see, over here, I have kind of fictionalized books about real people.
Okay.
Which, man, I can't keep these books here. Love that. I have a whole mess of books by Jennifer Degenhardt.
Awesome.
And she's an incredibly prolific author. And there's so many books. I have a bunch of Myra Canyon books and one random Bianca. My kids decided that this should be here with Rival. I had a student librarian helper this year, so she got to make some decisions.
I was going to say it kind of fits in because it has like, you know, an animal plays a really big part in that book. So I kind of see the connection.
I think that's where she was going with it. And because she volunteered to come in once a week and like keep it organized, that was great for me.
Really smart strategy, by the way.
So
I think everybody has the student that would love to do that.
Yeah, so if you think about the 5 languages of love, this kid was an acts of service kid, and that was how she wanted to say, and it was really good for our relationship. She had some special needs, and it was just really great. In terms of organizing, I have made little like colored titles.
Nice.
And so it's really easy to see where things go back, and sometimes they're just sticky notes. Like, you know, because
it doesn't have to be fancy. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be fancy. It could just be, for years, it was just a piece of masking tape and Sharpie. So super easy.
Whatever you can do is great. That is the message we want to convey.
The one thing to think about is that you want it to be self-regulating. So students can like manage it so you don't have to, because you're a really highly experienced teacher, or even a new teacher, you still have a lot of training and education. So let your kids do that.
Elicia, one question that just occurred to me. Now, I know that you also read novels with your, as class novels, where you're reading a novel all together with your students as a class. So this, you know, you've got your free reading that functions as a library here. The novels, like you guys just finished reading Esperanza. Do you have those novels in your library, or do you keep them out?
I keep them out.
Okay.
So the way I work it is in 7th grade. So in our program, in 6th grade, students read Brandon Brown Dice la Verdad. In 6th. In 7th grade, they don't read a novel.
Okay.
They do read all of our like single page stories, and that's their library. We call it the vertical library. And so stories and Revista Literal, which is the free fiction magazine, and things of that nature. In 8th grade, and then in 7th grade, in an honors class, our Spanish 1 honors class, they read one book. Last year it was El Escape Cubano at the end of the year when they had enough language.
Okay.
So in 8th grade, I have them reading I teach different levels. So I have 2 different novels, and I don't have those in the library because I don't want them to read them yet.
Yeah.
Once we've finished them, they go in the library.
Okay. I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
But since I actually tend to read the novels at the end of the year, they might only be in the library for a couple weeks. But I will tell you that my 8th graders love rereading Brandon Brown Dice la Verdad. And they love like reading more about Brandon Brown.
So just to clarify, so when you read a novel with your whole class, you have a full class set of them. So you would have, 35 or however many kids are in your class. In your class library, obviously you're going to just have whatever you're able to have. But what do you find is a good number of copies of a book to have in the library?
Oh man, that's hard to say. So really popular books.
Well, how many students do you have, I guess, per class? That would be an
So
important
I
thing
have
to.
about 20 per class.
Okay.
So I have small groups.
Yeah.
But I still can't have enough copies, especially at the beginning of the year, of Capybara con Botas and Perezosa Impaciente and Bart Quiere un Gato. I don't have enough of those to go around because every kid wants to read them, especially in my non-honors classes.
So like having 5 or 10 copies is great.
Yeah. So I
can
think
get them.
5 would be a great number to start, or more.
Okay.
Which is very easiest. Ones. Same with the books by Craig. Those fly. I just can't.
I can just see my second grade reader. He loves graphic novels, and he has a quite high reading level, but he doesn't want to read at his level. He wants to read graphic novels exclusively. Yeah. So
which is fine.
Which is totally fine, and we 100% support him in that. But I can just see he would be like going for those. That would be all and he would read.
And
them
I would
over
say,
and over.
The graphic novels, you can actually read a lot higher as a graphic novel because there's so much contextual support. So I would say this is a pretty hard book, and the other ones from Senor Woolley, they're challenging, but they're not too challenging because they've got so much support, and that's one of the great things about them.
And if we're just showing books really quickly and you're like trying to scramble and write down the titles, don't worry, we'll send a list that has all of these things in it.
Absolutely. So how do my students actually use the library? This is key. First of all, at the beginning of the year, I start them reading for about 2 or 3 minutes.
And this is, again, can you clarify, this is not with your first year students?
No, this is with our students who have had 1 or 2 years of comprehension-based instruction.
Okay.
So, but, every kid acquires at a different rate. So they might not have a lot of language by the time they get into 8th grade, but they probably have more than none.
Okay. So your classroom library is really for your kids that have, obviously it's in the room for everyone, but the kids that are using it are your kids that are in their 3rd year.
Their second or third year,
depending.
Year. Okay. Because we get students new to 7th and new to 6th and new to 7th. We tend not to get new to 8th students in our program, in our school. So at the beginning of the year, about the 2nd or 3rd week of school, I do some very intentional teaching about the library, how to use it, how to put books away, what it means to find something comprehensible. And we can link to kind of the lesson plan that I use and how I set it up.
Awesome.
And then Martina shared earlier a link about how Andrea does some speed book dating.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that was so cool.
Some similar things to that about having kids talk in L1 about the books and having them explore and share. But I let them pick a couple books the very first day we do it, and I give them 2 minutes. And then they have to put them back. And then like 2 days later, I'll give them 3 minutes. And I work up to about 15 to 20 minutes twice a week. But I do it in 1 minute increments.
Okay.
So by, December, January, they're reading for 15 or 20 minutes, depending on because they have to build up their stamina.
Yeah.
The way I actually organize it, because I have 3 or 4 different classes sharing the library, every kid gets a bookmark. And these are from Mike Pito and downloadable on TPT. And they've got like graphics and then a quote about reading on the back. And I just printed them on colored cardstock, gave one to each kid, and had them write their name on the edge. Perfect. So if this student is reading this book, they put it in there and everybody can see, oh, that kid is in my class. I can't get that book.
Oh, I see.
But if it's another
they're color-coded by class.
Exactly.
Okay.
So a kid in another class could come and get this, but they can't check it out.
I see.
So, and that's how I ran it. That's how I ran my elementary library. That's how I run this one, and it works remarkably well.
Awesome. So then a kid can come back, like they read it for 15 minutes, they don't finish it. They can come back to that book with the bookmark in it and can pick up where they left off. You do let kids check out from your library, and you talked about book source last time, but books cannot be checked out if they have bookmarks of other kids in them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's really important. And like, it's not perfect. There's always some kid who's like, Senora, I can't find my bookmark.
Yeah.
You know, I teach middle school, like, it's fine. We work it out.
You know, Elicia, I'm loving listening to you about this, because I can see like there's so much thought that goes into making this successful. And I think that's really important, that like, I mean, you can have a classroom library, but if you want to access the benefits of having a classroom library and having your students reading, like it takes a lot of intention, but nothing that you're saying is hard. It just takes having a plan and executing on it. So like you said, you know, when you first start with your the free reading with your students, having some time where you do the speed dating, or where they, you know, where they're just checking out the books and the slowly building. It's not complicated stuff, but it has to be done if you want this to be successful.
Yeah. And I didn't start like this, believe me. Like, this has all grown over the last several years, with buying new books, figuring out what works, figuring out what books kids like, figuring out what is and isn't a good fit, like all of this. It was not instantaneous at all. So don't think that it was. In terms of how do students use it also, I don't have them have any kind of accountability. They don't have to tell me what they read. I literally walk around the room once or twice a month and notice.
I thought you were going to say like once or twice, like when they're reading.
Oh, no. I sit at my desk and I read too. The only reason they can interrupt me is for a book recommendation, and that's totally okay. They can always interrupt me for a book recommendation, but other than that, like, I'm reading too, and I'm reading either books from my library or something that I want to read in Spanish. I'm modeling it and not distracting them, because the number one distractor to reading in a classroom is usually the teacher.
I believe that.
And that's something I learned in my elementary training, and something that has been repeated as I've gone to more trainings about reading.
So like walking around and being like, hey, tell me about what you're reading. Hey, do you like the story? Hey. Just let me freaking read.
Because it's hard. It's hard to concentrate. I also let students sit wherever they like within reason. I have some cushions and some stuffed animals. And if they all, like, you know how 8th grade girls like always have to like be on top of each other? That's fine, as long as they're actually reading. And if one or two kids are taking a nap, you know, it's not the end of the world. Honestly, like, maybe they needed a nap. It's okay. Like, as long as it's not a regular thing, it's okay.
I love that. And in the same way that you talk about using like the use of English in your class, like we like the mindset that like we've got to let students do what they need to do. Like you know, they are humans. They're like they have to be able to learn how to function and meet their needs, identify their needs and meet them. And so modeling that for them is awesome.
And you know, if they're not focused on their book, if they're restless or having a conversation with a partner or something, I don't do shared reading at all, because that is distracting. That's a signal to me that today isn't a good day for them. They're reading the wrong thing. Right? And so like, I need to address that with both of those in mind. Like, are you just being a little pain in the butt because you're having a bad day? Or because like you're super bored with what you're reading and like you're really interested in what your friend is reading? Well, great. Why don't you go get a copy of that book then?
Right.
You know, as far as accountability, I have almost none, but I do ask students to write on a sticky note and just tell me, was it hard? What did you read? Was it hard? How would you rate it? And like, I don't give any guidelines other than 5 is great, 1 is yeah, and a comment if you want.
And you got that
so,
idea that was inspired by Alina Filipescu, right? With
yes, I'm sure I
stickers.
got that from Alina. And so what happens is then I start to see what books are popular.
Uh-huh.
And what books kids like and what books they don't.
Where do they put the sticky notes? Just right on the cover.
Just on the cover. And then about once a month, I go through and I pull them off and I create that bar graph that I showed last week.
In the classroom tour, which you guys, if you didn't catch the classroom tour to see the rest of the room, you can go back and watch that Fun Club episode.
So I think anything else about how they use it? I don't think there is anything else. And then how I managed it, I kind of talked about that already.
Yeah, I think we've covered that. I think the only thing to reiterate was open source is the website that you use. Book Source. Book Source is the website you use to manage checkouts and stuff.
And it's free and it's not perfect, but like it's really easy to use. I found once I created the database, some teachers have worked with their school librarians. Some teachers just use a clipboard, and that's okay too. That's totally
whatever
okay.
You can do. I always just had a clipboard in my room that students just wrote down the title. And then of course I never really followed up because that's my
right. Well, I haven't looked at all the books that I haven't gotten back, but we're just going to let that go because these are weird times.
We still have the library books from my kids' school here. I guess we'll return them in the fall. Awesome. Well, that I think is super helpful. And usually I would ask for questions. We take questions, but it's just me and you. So do you have anything that you feel like you wanted to talk about that we missed?
No. Be thoughtful. One thing I would say is like, use student work. I know. This is from Unit 14, little thing that we did, like a little starter. It's super cute.
Awesome.
And they love reading this. Oh my gosh. So student work is remarkably compelling, and just teach the kids what you want them to do. Give them an opportunity to practice it, and you'll be amazed at what happens. And be patient. When we started reading in our Spanish class, there was not a school-wide initiative of free reading. And it took a lot of time to help the kids build up the stamina, to help all the kids build up the stamina to read for 5 or 10 minutes, period. As new teachers came in and started their own free reading program in L1, it got easier. So you can also partner with your other teachers. How are you reading? How often are you reading in your classes? It's a really nice way to reach out.
I love that. Well, Elicia, thank you so much. And I think just reiterating that, like, this, you didn't wake up one morning and have a library like this and have systems like that, but this has been slowly built up over time. And I think that everyone watching this is really fortunate because they can get a jump start on it by just learning from your mistakes and your triumphs. So thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome. And you can leave questions, viewers, and we will respond to them. If you want us specifically, tag one of us, because sometimes we get kind of overwhelmed with comments. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, or you can always email info@Comprehensible Classroom, and if it's a question for Elicia, we'll direct to her. I guess we do have your email address set up. We've got to start using it. So
yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
Yes. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.